Hello and welcome to All Caps. I'm Isaac Anderson, author of A Song of Bones in the Garden Maze, and I'm joined by W.E. Singh, the
That's me.
author of dum-dum-dum,
Oh,
the Ginfernal Conspiracy.
yes, the Ginfernal Conspiracy. Exactly. Thank you.
So, what is the Ginfernal Conspiracy?
What is the Ginfernal Conspiracy? Well, it's a humorous urban fantasy,
Hmm.
and it's set in the 22nd century to begin with, in what is now the Republic of London. As the United Kingdom is no longer united, it's segmented and split, as has the rest of the world, and everything's kind of changed around a bit. And it follows the hero who's holding on to the unicorn's horn there for dear life, as he is sentenced to death by a mysterious phone call late at night, and then finds himself kidnapped and realizes or is told that the only solution to this death threat is to temporarily die, travel to the Egyptian afterlife, and seek the answers there. So it's between 21st, 22nd century London and the Egyptian afterlife, or at least book one is anyway.
Okay,
And the
it
conspiracy runs through the trilogy and gets more of a conspiracy.
it sounds very Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, very Terry Pratchett. Um, what were your inspirations?
Well, that's difficult to say. I mean, it's very kind of you to put me in such incredible company. I'm not sure that I would do that myself. Although, of course, when you run Facebook ads and things like that, you are encouraged to claim that you are the new Terry
Yes,
Pratchett.
yes.
I wouldn't go quite that far, but it's definitely humorous, and it's completely off the wall. Basically, because I made it up as I was going along. I'm one of these pantsers rather than a plotter.
Mm.
Um, I've forgotten what you asked me. I'm sorry. I blather on and then I forget what the question is. What did
That's
you ask
fine.
me?
I wanna know what your inspirations were.
Oh,
Like,
my inspirations. Well, it was a line that came to me about my very hapless hero, who starts out as a hapless hero, who gets a bit better with time. And I was just picturing him lying there on a Monday night, feeling sorry for himself, wondering what had gone wrong with his life, which had been so promising when he was younger, and yet here he is on a Monday night with nothing to do apart from watch TV. And it kind of went from there. So the initial draft was me spending far too long talking about what a sad sack he was. And then I suddenly had this idea that he's going to get a phone call and someone is going to say, "You're about to die." And that's going to shake his life up. And it went from there. Beyond that, I'm not sure that there were actual inspirations. It really was just that
okay,
line.
interesting. So it was you're very much an inspiration writer.
Mm, I am,
So,
yes.
what advice do you have for other writers starting out? They're thinking that they may also be an inspiration writer.
Yes. Now you're putting me on the spot, aren't you? Um, Look, I mean, I think as you know, some people plan their books to different degrees and plot things out, and they know exactly what they want to go in chapter two and chapter three, and each of the scenes and all of the beats. That's one way of writing. It's never been the way that I've written. My background, I spent 25 years as a journalist, and even as a journalist, although of course I had facts,
Mhm.
so there was something that I had to put in the story. Whenever I sat down to write a feature-length story, it happened the same way that my novel did. I would either think of the ending, this is how I want to end my story, and then work backwards, or I would come up with a bit in the middle that I thought was cracking, that had come from the interview or had come from the experience that I just had, and then I'd work around that. Or
Mhm.
I would come up with the opening line and then see where that took me. And I would just allow, even with journalism, I would allow the story to tell me what it wanted to say. And
Right.
so I suppose if you're pantsing, which is making it up on the fly, then that's what you have to do. You just have to let the story tell you what it wants to do. And it's quite often not what you expect it to do.
Mhm.
And often
Mhm.
the characters end up doing things that aren't quite what you had in mind for them in the first place. I mean, I'm not certain when I set out to write this book that I had gin in mind, for example. I knew that I had this sad sack on the couch and his life was going to be shaken up by a phone call, but I wasn't entirely certain who it was going to be. And then I had this idea that had been playing around in the back of my mind. I think I must have read something online about them, about the Seal of Solomon. And I thought, I want to have the Seal of Solomon in this somehow. And so therefore there was the logical connection to the jinn. And
Mhm.
so it all kind of began to come together in a way. And then of course, when you're pantsing and you're not planning, you then have to go back very carefully once you've finished writing the book and make sure that what you've written at the end conforms to what you started out writing in the beginning.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I would say if you're going to pants, then you have to be very, very careful to make sure there are no glaring plot holes.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mm.
So it sounds like to me you focus on either a very strong hook that brings you through,
Yes.
or certain situations that the story itself revolves around within the story.
Yes.
So,
Exactly.
when you were a journalist,
Mm.
what sort of journalism did you do? Is what you're writing very much what you used to do as a journalist? Like, were you
Oh
like,
no, not at all, not at all. No, no. I was a journalist. I did do. I wrote features rather
okay,
than breaking news. I did do some breaking news, but it was mostly feature stories. So I was kind of writing not fiction, but in a fictional way, if you like, because feature writing is very different
hmm,
to a breaking news story, because you have to craft a story rather than just give people information. So what did I do? Well, I was based in the Middle East for 20 years, which is where my fascination for things like gin come from. And I did a really, really mixed bag. So I had this very strange hybrid life where I was based in Lebanon for 20 years. And when I arrived in Lebanon in 1998, three-quarters of the country was occupied by Syria and a quarter of the country was occupied by Israel. And so I would spend my mornings writing for a Lebanese newspaper about the effects of this. There was still fighting going on in southern Lebanon. I would write about that. And then very early on, I got a couple of very lucky gigs with a couple of big magazines in the UK, which were completely different. And they were about design and architecture. So I would
hmm,
go down in the morning to southern Lebanon and talk to people who just lost their homes, terrible human tragedies, and then come back in the afternoons to Beirut, and I'd meet a Lebanese designer, and I would be taken to their house, and I would be talking to them about architecture and their design, and talking to them about food and all of the rest of it.
interesting.
And over time, that kind of took over because there were so many people writing about politics, and at the time, so few people writing about life in the Middle East, creativity of the people who live there, that I started focusing more on that as
Hmm.
time went by. But it was a very mixed bag. So I went to Iraq, I went to the occupied territories, I was in Lebanon. So I kind of went backwards and forwards between occasionally being shot at and mostly talking to architects. So
Wow.
it was a bit odd. It was a bit of an odd experience,
How
but I
much
enjoyed
of
it.
that experience made it into the book? Like, are you taking little experiences like,
I mean, nothing directly. I wrote a nonfiction book. Actually, I wrote a couple of nonfiction books about Lebanon. And actually, my first self published novel was about a walk I took in 2016, which was from one end of Lebanon to the other through Mount Lebanon.
hmm,
And it was 28 days and 430 kilometers, I think. I don't know what that is in miles, 300 something odd miles. Um, and that was my experiences of Lebanon. It was all about Lebanon. It was about my experiences of Lebanon. It was about Lebanese history, Lebanese culture, the people. There was a bit of conflict in there. So that was really a distillation of what I'd been doing for the 20 years that I was there. The only way it leaks into this book, I think, is the fact that I look, I loved Lebanon. I absolutely adored it. I had the best time of my life there. If I could still be there now, I would still be there now. The people, the place, it doesn't make any sense. It's pure insanity, and I think, but it's creative insanity. I don't mean that in a bad way. I really don't mean that in
yeah,
a negative way. It's
fun
just
insanity?
it's fun in the sense that things are always changing and things are always all over the place and you never really quite know what's happening. I'm not sure I'd call it fun necessarily because it's terrible for the people who live there. including myself when I was living there. And it's terrible for the people who live there long term and the effects that that has on their lives. But um, I think just not really knowing in the morning what was going to happen that day, where you were going to end up, who you were going to meet, what might happen along the way, the things that you might hear from people, that level of craziness, I think, has maybe made it into my novel because
Hmm.
you're not quite certain from one moment to the other where this story is going. It makes sense. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense, but it's less linear, perhaps, than most novels would be.
Okay.
Let's put it that way.
Most of the authors that I talk to are
Mm,
into like pure fantasy.
yes.
It's not very often I talk to someone who
Mm,
does urban fantasy.
mm.
Is it, do you think that's because of your journalistic background that you're kind of mixing a little bit of the real world in there, or?
Maybe. I hadn't really thought about it. That's a very good question. It's possible. I certainly don't write epic fantasy. I'm not certain that I have the patience to write epic fantasy. I'm not certain that I could concentrate for long enough to produce 800 words, 800 pages, a 800 page long book. I do love reading epic fantasy, though. It's just not something that I write. Yeah, maybe. Let's say that. Let's say that.
Okay.
That's why it's because of the journalism that the urban side has come out. I actually never really thought about it as urban fantasy, but as your listeners may or may not know, when you start publicizing your novel through various different platforms, they then start asking you to categorize your novel. And mine seemed to come out in the urban fantasy category. I don't think I ever sat down and thought consciously, I'm going to write an
Yeah.
urban fantasy. It just kind of ended up there. And I also mix in sci-fi elements. So in book two, we aren't in the 22nd century Republic of London or the Egyptian afterlife. We are in fact on one of Jupiter's moons.
Okay.
But it all makes sense. It's all logical. It all fits in. So yes, so I like to play around with things. I guess is what I'm trying to get across in a very awkward, long-winded way.
That's fun. Um, I kind of think that the reason most indie authors choose fantasy is we're a
Mm,
little bit lazy
mm,
and we don't want to do a lot of research.
ah,
We'd much rather make things up. But
right.
you are working from a slightly more what's the word I'm looking for? Um
Unhinged.
Not unhinged. You are
Okay.
more determined. You are more
Hmm.
I had completely lost the word. But you're working from more rules than indie authors would typically put upon themselves, especially
I mean,
for a first book or a first, I guess, fiction
May,
book.
maybe. I am playing fast and loose, of course. I mean, my take on Suleiman Solomon is definitely not the classic take on either of those characters. But yes, I mean, there are certain things that you can't really take liberties with. But I haven't really found that to be a limitation in any
Right.
way. And of course, I'm also setting it in the 22nd century Republic of London, which is entirely fictitious. So I can do whatever I like with that. So, yeah, I suppose maybe to the degree that it's not a completely invented world, you have to observe gravity and the basic laws that govern this universe. But then that's not really any different to science fiction, is it?
Yeah,
In a sense. And I
that's
haven't
true.
gone down that kind of hard sci-fi route where I really have to be careful about how long it might take by, if you're traveling at zero point 0.5 the speed of light from here to wherever it is you're going to. I'm not in that territory yet. I'm not certain I want to get into that territory.
The rule for that is longer than you think because the ship breaks.
Well, indeed, there's also that. There's also that. Unless, of course, there's some crazy thing where they can just disappear into a wormhole and then pop out on the other
Yeah, yeah,
side
you can
a few
always cheat
seconds
like
later.
that.
You can always
I
do
think
something.
that's also why indie authors like fantasy. They don't want to deal with the hard science and like
That's
math and
interesting. I think you might get a lot of angry responses from indie authors.
I mean that's kind of what
For
I
that
did.
content.
I had my sci-fi idea and
Mm,
I had a fantasy idea. And
mm,
the fantasy idea was even more attractive because it was all
mm.
animal characters. so
Mm.
I could really make whatever I wanted.
Mm.
But it ended up being a little bit harder because they're animal characters. I couldn't
Mm.
write them like people. I didn't
Right.
want people to forget that they were animals. So
Okay.
it was a little bit harder for me to do that. But
Okay.
I'm glad I went fantasy before I went sci-fi. Now I kind of have an idea of how I would do the sci-fi. So
Okay.
fantasy is an excellent proving ground just to test things and
Huh.
grow your skills.
Well, I'm glad I made the right choice then.
I think so. I think so. Micah Hoon says urban fantasy is underrepresented in the indie
Oh,
space. So potentially a very nice market there.
could be. Let's hope so. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I've got book
S-
two coming out in June, so we'll see how
Oh, that's
that,
fun.
if that carries through or not.
Very cool. Very cool. So, with your background in
Mm.
journalism,
Mm.
what made you want to write something fictitious?
Oh, I've always wanted to do that. Always, my entire life. Ever since I was a child, all I ever wanted to do was write books. But I also wanted to make a living, and I didn't really. Well, I didn't have wealthy parents, so I couldn't afford to sit in a garret somewhere and starve artistically while I produced my great work of art. So I liked writing. I have written short stories ever since I was young, and I was too chicken to be an author when I was 20. So I decided that I would be a journalist instead. And I think it was actually very useful. I got an opportunity to get paid to write. I learned to write as a result of writing journalism. I moved from hard news and breaking news into feature length pieces, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 word long pieces, which then gave me the background that I needed or that was useful when I was trying to write something even longer than that.
Hmm.
So yes, but
Did
yes.
you
So I
have
basically,
any? Go ahead. I'm
sorry.
sorry.
No, so I was just going to say I basically ended up doing what I've always wanted to do, which is a very lucky place to be in.
That is. That is very lucky. Um, how do you combat writer's block in your work?
Oh, I don't believe in writer's block.
Okay.
Um, the reason I say that I don't, and I'm not saying that I don't suffer from it, um, but I don't believe in it in the sense that when I was a journalist, you had to produce words that went on the page because there was a deadline, and quite often that deadline, particularly if it was breaking news, was that day, possibly in a couple of hours' time, and so you just had to write. You didn't have a choice, and I think because of that, I've never really truly believed in this idea of writer's block. I think there are moments when you're not inspired. I think there are moments when you sit down and you type 5,000 words, 4,875 of which are not worth reading, and then you go back and you have to rewrite them. But I mean, that kind of classic idea of sitting there staring at the screen, or I mean, even like in The Shining, where you've got Jack as you've got the main character typing Jack as a dull boy. All work. What does he write? All work and no play
All
makes
work
Jack
and
a
no
dull
play
boy.
make Jack a dull boy.
Yes. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, Stephen King is obviously a far greater writer than I am. Perhaps you should talk to him about writer's block and why he had his character suffer from that. But I don't really see writing as, it's not a hobby for me. I mean, it might be at the moment because I'm not making a living out of it, but it wasn't for the 25 years before I started writing novels full time. I had to make a living, and I did make a living, and so you get past I don't know what to write, and you just write and power
Hmm.
through, and then go back and revise and change things and take things out. And we see this is why I think for me also starting at the end or starting in the middle is also very helpful, because then I'm not stuck at what I want to say at the outset. I already know how I want to end, or I already know that a third of the way through I'm going to start writing about this. So I just have to figure out how to get there,
Hmm.
and that makes it a bit easier, I think.
So
It's like
so
having a
jumping
stepping
around from
stone.
the beginning, or like when you get stuck.
Um, I mean, at the beginning, when I'm starting a new project, yes, I'm jumping around because I'm coming up with I'd like this and I'd like that, and oh, this is a fun idea. And if I
Hmm.
have that, what about this? And oh, and then I hear this line in my head, and I think, oh, I want to have that in there somewhere. not all of this ends up in the final novel, but it shapes the way that I write it, um, and gives me other ideas along the way that I then
Hmm.
use or don't use. Um, yes. So yes, it's all a bit chaotic, but I think it works in the end. And I have nothing but the deepest admiration for people who can sit down and pin cards to a board. Um, scene one, act one, scene one, act one, scene two, and I'm going to have this and I'm going to have that, and it's going to flow from here to there and from there to here. And I have nothing but admiration for people like that, because that's definitely not how my brain works,
Is there a
unfortunately.
reason that like did you try the outlining way, or were you just
Mm,
naturally just I'm
mhm.
gonna pants this out. Feels natural to me.
Well, the first book was just me writing the way I always write, the way I've always written, the way I've written from the start. Um, in the second, for the second novel, which is now in the second round of editing, um, I decided at the beginning, Isaac, that I was going to be very, very disciplined, and I was going to write an outline, because I knew what my characters were, and I kind of knew how I wanted book two to end. So I knew where book one had ended, so I knew what I needed to do more or less to get from the end of book one to the end of book two. So I sat down and I meticulously plotted out every single chapter. I then sat down and I tried to break down each chapter into scenes and what I would have in these scenes. And then I started writing. And the minute I started writing, all of that went out the window. Every single last bit of planning went straight out of the window. And actually, the other day, I found the file because it was buried somewhere on my computer, and I found it. And having written book two, I looked at what I'd written for my plot line for book two, and I think there's maybe about 30 to 40% of what I'd planned out is actually in book two, and the rest of it is just, it's absolutely not that.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, I suppose so. I don't think it's necessarily me. I think I like, and I do understand that this, and so maybe I should say this to your the people who are watching the show who are thinking about doing this. It does create a lot of problems when you make things up on the fly,
Hmm.
because you aren't always going to be consistent, and you have to go back and make sure that that name is spelled the same way, the date is the correct date. You haven't suddenly, added 2 months to the journey when at the beginning you said it had ended in a week. So these are just things that you have to then go back and check and make sure that you haven't you've got them all lined up at the end. But for me, I think I tried writing according to that plan, and it honestly, within about 40 minutes, I was off and I was doing something else, because my character decided that it didn't like what it was that I wanted him to do. And he wanted to do this instead. So that was what he was going to do.
Yeah.
Uh, and I never really understood that, because, if you're writing, when you're a journalist, you can't just take your character, you can't just take your people off in a direction that they haven't given you. And so I would listen to authors before I became one myself, or before I became a fiction author. I'd listen to them talk about how their characters would argue with them, and how their characters would decide that no, that they're not going to do that, they're going to do this instead. And no, I don't say that kind of thing, I say this instead. And how the characters would determine the plot. And I always thought that was kind of mystical, slightly woo woo. What are we talking about here? This is insane. These are people that you've made up. How can they have a life of their own? But they really do.
Hmm.
And you have this little voice that is Xander, or it's his sister, or it's his grandmother, and you're getting her to do something, and she just crosses her arms and looks at you and says, "But I would never do that. Why are you having me? It's completely insane. Why are you having me do that?" And then, of course, you can't, because she refuses to cooperate with you. So, but I suppose if you're a planner, you don't have these problems, because and you have your characters under control. I think it's just
Well,
it's an indication of
um,
my messy life, maybe.
I have had characters that will not follow the outline.
Mm,
They want to do this, but I have
mm,
outlined this,
mm,
and usually that results in me taking a couple of days just sitting there
mm,
and thinking about it.
mm,
If this character does not do this and does what he wants instead, how
mm,
much extra work is that going to create?
Mm.
Does that take the book in a more interesting direction or does it not?
Mm. Yes.
Um, if it doesn't,
Mm.
and I'm still having trouble reining that character in, a
Mm.
trick that I do is I
Mm.
change his name.
Oh.
Changing the name to, like, if he
Mm.
has a very, like, aggressive sounding name, I
Mm.
make his name a little bit just a tad more plain. And
Okay.
then all of a sudden his personality just changes a little bit and now he's following the
Ah.
outline. So
Ah.
I don't always do that because a lot of
Yes.
times the character has a pretty good idea.
Yes.
I think I've only ever done that once. I've changed the name
Yes.
and now it's working.
Yes.
But I have been working on a kind of a video script about outlining, and
Mm.
I'm trying to because an outline is something that helps the author.
Mm.
It's not something that slows the author down,
Yes.
and
No. Absolutely.
it's not a book.
Mm.
So I'm trying to because I think that there's no pure version of an outline that works for
Mm.
everybody. You got to
Mm.
find that outline that works for you.
Mm.
So my outlines aren't
Mm.
usually that detailed.
Mm.
They're a little bit detailed, and they're
Mm.
much more focused on character motivation
Mhm.
more so than plot. I'll
Mhm.
have a couple of bullet points for the plot. But when it
Okay.
comes to what the characters are doing, what they need, and how they feel and their decisions,
Mm.
that's a lot more detailed because I need to
Mm.
understand the characters.
Mm. Mm.
So outlining, I there is no one way to do it.
Mm.
A good outline is just it could be a couple of sticky notes and you're good to go.
Mm.
But the best outline is the one that actually helps you along the way.
Mm. Well, I think what you said earlier is makes a very good point that you allow your characters maybe to make changes as long as it serves the interest of the plot. Does it
Yes.
make the story more interesting or not? And I don't let my characters make changes if I don't like the direction it's going in, or if it's going to take me in a direction that either contradicts the book as it exists so far, or takes me in a direction that I'm not going to be able to find a way out of.
Hmm.
So my characters and I do argue a bit about their decisions and where they think they're going to go. But generally, I think I tend to trust that kind of flow moment.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of ideas simply occur on the page as I'm typing. I've always tended to think with my fingers. And as soon as I start typing, things begin to make sense and ideas begin to flow. And story arcs begin to form in a way that they don't when I sit there and I try and think about them in
Yeah.
advance. I think I have to do in order to create rather than think before I create. And I think it's just two very different ways of, or two slightly different ways of reaching the same goal at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. You're really just kind of deciding where do you want to do the busy work? Do you want
Yes,
to do it in the beginning with all
yes,
your outlining and stuff, like character stuff, or do
yes,
you want to do it after all the work has been done
yes,
and
yes,
do a bunch of editing? So you just
yes.
gotta decide what sounds more interesting to you, what's more helpful for you.
Yes. And I think, at least for me, I enjoy writing so much that I like simply being able to write. So I think
Hmm.
that's why that works for me. And I would rather go back at the end and make the necessary edits and make the necessary changes and corrections, possibly multiple times, than I would sit down and think about it before I write it. I just want it to flow. The
Yeah.
dialogue works better for me that way when it's just flowing, rather than if I've had to think very carefully about, or even slightly carefully about what might be happening in this scene. But everyone has their own way of doing things, right? And
Yeah.
not everything is valid. And if it works for you, then it works for you.
One example for me that of a character just changing on the fly
Mm,
is in my outline. I had this certain character, this rat,
mm,
was going to
mm,
die.
mm,
He was a goon. He was there to
mm,
prove the situation serious. He was going to die. I
mm.
got to the scene and he didn't die.
Ah,
I was like, oh,
okay.
he was interesting. I liked the way he
Right,
talked. I liked
right.
his outlook on things, and he survived. He didn't die.
Okay. Okay.
So then, book two, I'm editing right now. I
Mm.
need someone to die in a grisly way to prove the area
Ah,
is dangerous.
okay.
Like, you missed, you dodged that bullet. You probably can't
Right,
dodge this bullet, but
right.
he also survives here.
Ah.
So I'm like,
So you brought in someone else to die in his place, did you?
somebody else dies.
Uh,
I spin up a new rat. Like this is he's
right,
been around in the background. He can die instead.
right.
Um, but I'm very happy I didn't kill off this rat
Mm,
because I needed kind of a golem-y character later
mm.
on to act as a
Okay,
guide. And here
okay,
was this guy ready to go.
okay.
And
Well, then that's what he
it,
was trying to tell you.
he was never meant to interact with the main cast.
Right.
He was only ever interacting with the other villains, and he was kind of a
Yes,
funny, weird character. So I
yes,
never wrote him with the intention of interacting with the main group. And now
yes,
here with the main group, and he fits so well with the main group
yes,
now. So
yes.
sometimes that character knows where it wants to be
Oh,
and
absolutely.
looks at the outline and says, "I know you have this plan, but this really meshes.
Yes,
So have a plan, sure, but also be flexible to
yes.
find where the story wants to be, like you've been saying."
Yes, I think you have to be flexible. I mean, in the first book, one of the characters who is Xander's grandmother was initially just going to be a single scene. She was going to come in, do something very important, and then disappear. And the rest of the book was going to be about Xander dealing with what he needed to deal with, dealing with his conspiracy. She was just going to give him the keys, as it were, to dealing with this. Um, and she just, I fell in love with her. And so not only did she stay, and not only is she in book 2, and not only will she be in book 3, but I have already written a spin-off novella which I give away to people who sign up for my newsletter, and it's just her and her sister. And the main character is not even there, because I love her so much that she gets her own series of books. And she was originally just going to be a one-scene wonder. So, these are the things that happen.
Excellent. Very cool. I had a list of kind of clickbaity questions here. So
Oh,
okay,
no.
here they are.
Okay.
So,
Right. Yes.
what world building tips do you have for people starting out?
Oh, I don't even know how to begin to approach that. Um, I think the number one tip would be that however fantastical your world, it has to follow an internal logic.
Hmm.
So you can't just have everything happening because you want it to happen. If you have created, for example, a world in which one character can come in suddenly and solve a problem in the blink of an eye because you need them to, you can't really have that happening again and again and again. And when they do that in the blink of an eye, there needs to be a logical reason why they did that in the blink of an eye that is believable to the reader. Otherwise, I mean, you're asking with fantasy, you're asking, or with any kind of fiction, you're asking your readers to suspend disbelief, right? You're
Yeah.
asking them to put reality to one side and immerse themselves in this world that you've created for them. But if you then have these really jarring changes that you've said A in chapter 2, and then in chapter 13, you're now saying Y instead of A, the reader picks up on that, and that will kick them out of your world. And your goal is for your reader never to leave your world. So I would
Hmm.
say that, I hope that makes sense. I think that makes sense when I think back on what I've said. I think you need to set up an internal logic. Even if that logic is insane, there has to be an
Yeah.
internal logic, that there are certain things that can happen and there are certain things that can't happen. And then maybe going back to what you were saying at the beginning with sci-fi and fantasy, maybe with sci-fi it's slightly easier in a way because there are certain immutable laws that you can't really get around
Yeah.
without doing something super cheesy. And so that constrains the possibility, but then it means that your imagination has to work harder. Whereas with fantasy, maybe there is the temptation to just imagine anything because it's fantasy, it's not real, right? So anything could happen. But then if anything could happen, you don't necessarily have a story,
Yeah.
or you don't necessarily have a story that people are going to want to invest their time in. You have to give them a reason. There have to be stakes. And if your hero or one of the side characters can solve a problem instantly in the blink of an eye, then when the hero runs into a problem a bit later, but you don't want the problem to be solved in a blink of an eye, there has to be a logic as to why it's not being solved in the blink of an eye. Or if you have the problem solved in a blink of an eye every single time, then you don't have a story because there's no tension. There's no reason for the reader to keep reading because they know that whatever happens, oh, Xander's going to be fine because X is going to step in and do this, or Y is going to step in and do that. So I think, does that answer your question? It maybe
Yeah.
does.
Whenever I'm building a world for a story, I
Mm.
like to find a couple of limitations.
Mm.
Like I'm really into board games. I love
Ah,
learning
okay.
board games. I love learning
Okay.
interesting rules for board games. So when I'm doing world building, I
Yes.
think of 3 or 4 interesting little rules about the world.
Yes.
And these aren't
Yes.
rules that I'll necessarily tell the reader,
Yes.
but these are things I have in mind as I'm doing anything
Yes.
world related.
Yes.
So one exercise that I kind of like is I ask myself, why can't they cross the bridge?
Mm.
And I think of 3 different reasons why maybe they can't cross the bridge. And the weirder the reason, the better.
Mm.
And I try to take those reasons and say, okay, how far can I stretch this weird idea?
Mm.
They
Mm.
cannot cross the bridge because it is bad luck to walk on stone.
Okay.
Okay, interesting. How does that affect everything around them? And is
Yes.
that interesting or is that boring?
Or is it going to make your story impossible to tell?
Or is it gonna be, or is that gonna force me to tell a certain kind of story? And is that
Ah,
interesting?
yes. Yes.
I don't
Absolutely.
often do that because I'm very character first when I'm building a story. But if I
Yes.
am doing something that's the world comes first,
Yes.
that's how I would approach that.
Yeah, I think there was the quote that the surrealists, I think it might have been Picasso, but the surrealists used to say when they were criticized for painting. Initially, people said that their paintings looked like they were drawings done by children. There was no skill to them. And one of them, I'm going to say Picasso, and I'm probably wrong, so please don't write in with hate mail. But one of them said that basically the way you get to paint the way I paint is that you learn the rules first,
Hmm.
you absorb the rules, and then you forget them, and then you create what you want to create. And I think that's maybe the idea with world building, in the sense that we're both trying to get across that you have these rules, you create these rules, you know what these rules are, whether they're spoken or unspoken. You know that your characters can do certain things in certain circumstances but not in others, and then you that helps create a believable setting because there are rules underpinning it. Because if there are no rules underpinning your story, then you don't really have a story. You just have a series of different scenes that maybe might hang together or maybe don't hang together. So
Yeah.
yes, I think that would be my number one tip. Or you could also do a Tolkien, and you could spend 30 years
Yeah.
creating your world and all the languages and all of the races and all the history before you actually start writing the stories that are set in it. But as most of us aren't J.R. Tolkien, and also don't have the means to spend 30 years creating a world before we actually produce stories that are written in it, maybe we just start with 4 or 5 rules and work with it from there.
I really hope that there's at least 3 Tolkiens out there right now
Oh, I'm sure
working
there
on
are.
stuff.
I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are. I mean, also, but at the end of the day, also, we have Tolkien. We have other people like Tolkien. We don't necessarily need to go down that path anymore.
It's
There's
true.
there's an entire world to explore. Times have changed. And I'm not saying this to diss epic fantasy, but there's a time and a place for reading an 800-page book, and maybe
Hmm.
we don't all have that time and a place anymore. And
Yeah.
maybe the reason the Lord of the Rings is so beloved is not only because it's such a great series of books, but also because it's pretty much the only series of books of its kind. And so it
Nothing like it.
stands out, and you can admire the man for his work and the amount of dedication and the time that he's put into it without necessarily wanting to read 27 versions of the Lord of the Rings written by other people,
Yes.
perhaps. Yeah.
I like to keep my books on the short side. I like,
Yes.
320 pages
Yes.
tops. Because I know I'm a small fish in a big pond, and
Yes.
not everybody has time for another 1,000-page epic. Because
Yes.
that's like, unless like I've made something mind blowing and incredible, and it's actually worth their
Absolutely.
time. Um,
Absolutely.
I'm sure by the time I'm 60, I'll have
Uh-huh.
my giant masterpiece ready to
Okay.
go.
Okay.
But until then, I'm more than willing just to make little tiny things that are fun and enjoyable to
Yes.
read and don't take up
Yes.
everyone's time.
Yes. I'm not sure that I necessarily think about taking up people's time, even though I've just kind of suggested that I do think about that. I want to write, and hopefully do write, the best story that I can. I
Yeah.
want to write a story that
Hopefully it's worth their time.
hopefully it's worth their time, exactly. But I don't think I don't think I sit down. I mean, my books are all kind of on the even shorter side. I
Mhm.
think Infernal Conspiracy is, I think it's 266 pages, and this
Hmm.
one that's coming out now is 290. So they're definitely on the shorter side of things. But I also have a novel that I wrote before I wrote this one, which I haven't published yet, and that's a 400 pager. And that probably isn't going to get published at any point in time soon because that needs quite a lot of work. But I also think of holding a book. I mean, holding 1,000-page book in your hand, it gets hard
Mhm.
after a while to hold that book up. It's a weight. It's like a workout. So give people something that isn't necessarily light in terms of content, but something light and fun to read that they're going to enjoy reading. And I think you've done as much of a service as, and often sometimes I read, and I'm obviously not going to name names at all because that would be horribly indiscreet. But sometimes you read these books that are in the 700, 600, 800 page range, and you think, well, okay, 200 pages of that was basically filler, and I could have
Mhm.
done without that. Um, it's kind of, and I hope I don't offend you by saying this. It's kind of the way I used to think of American TV series that were dictated by the advertising schedule, and they had to run for 26 episodes,
Yep.
and then you would have at least 10 episodes maybe they were okay, but
Like
they didn't really
that didn't
advance the
advance the story
story.
very much.
I didn't really get anything out of that. I got to see my favorite characters again this week, and that's fun, but it wasn't really all that interesting. And what happened to that plot that we were so wrapped up in 8 episodes ago? Where has that disappeared off to? And so I kind of, I'm not, I'm not bound by advertisers at the moment. So I don't need to fill my book. And I know, I also know, as I say this, and I'm probably going to get lots of people hating on me for saying this. I know there are people out there who absolutely love that, and they read it meticulously, and they have all the lore, and they're knowledgeable about the law, and they will fight people to the death over the law if they disagree with their interpretation of it. And I say, good for them. It's great. There are lovely books out there for them to read. I just don't really want to write that kind of book. I'd rather write something that
Yeah.
is pacey, and you don't feel that it's flagging too much in places, and you don't wonder why we're suddenly talking about, I don't know, a cookery class that has nothing to do with the Egyptian afterlife. Why are we suddenly
Yeah.
there? Is there a logic to it? So yes.
Uh,
So
uh,
yes.
Another strength to
Mm,
limiting the length of your story
yes.
is it doesn't give you a lot of wiggle room to waste time.
Yes.
Like you
Also.
really need to do like, okay, what's interesting, what's
Yes.
fun, what moves
Yes.
things along, and it really
Yes.
forces you to, improve your communication skills as a writer.
Yes, it really absolutely does, as opposed to my communication skills as a speaker, because I'm wordy and all over the place
Oh
when
yeah,
I
yeah.
speak. But when I write, it's much more pared down. I mean, I still have fun. I like to have fun with language. I like to have fun with my plot lines. So it's not just plot point, plot point, plot point, plot point. It is a story. It reads as a story, and I think it should read as a story, because if it's just plot point after another, again, you don't have a book. You have a
Mhm.
series of plot points. But if between plot points we've taken a 300-page digression, maybe you might want to consider slimming that down and keeping it more
Yeah.
manageable. Particularly at the beginning. I mean, this is I've just written my second, well, third, if you count the one that's unpublished, my third novel. I think maybe when I'm 60, I might be able to come up with my 800-page magnum opus, but then I would be in a position at that point in time perhaps to write it, which I
Yeah.
don't think I am right now. So I would rather just write the best story that I can at the moment, rather than write maybe the story that I think will, seal my reputation for eternity and be held up and, turned into a 3-part series by Peter Jackson.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it's, I
Like
can't write that
old
book
Peter
right now.
Jackson.
Yes, oh, very old Peter Jackson. I think he's younger than me, so he should be all right. He
Oh,
should
okay.
still be in there. As long as I get it in the next couple of years, he should still have time to shoot it. But yes, you evolve. When I started writing as a journalist, there is no way I could have written a 2,000-word story that would have held up under scrutiny.
Hmm.
It wasn't possible. I didn't have the skills for that. So I had to write 150 word, 200 word, 300 word. I'm not saying I worked my way up gradually, but you had to get used to writing that before you could consider taking on 1,000 words or 2,000 words, particularly with a newspaper where you don't have room to be overly wordy, and you can't digress even with feature stories, in lots of different
Yeah,
directions. You have to keep it tight. So those 2,000 words have to count. Um, but eventually you learn how to write 2,000 words, and once you can do 2,000 words, you learn how to write 5,000 words, and once you can do that, then 10, and so now you then work up to a novel. So the second book is slightly longer than the first book. The third book, I think, is going to be slightly longer than the second book. So maybe when I start my next series, they will be longer altogether, because I'll be in a better
yeah.
position. I'll know how to do that properly, rather than do it in a way that drives my readers batty and wastes their time, which is not what you want
Hey,
to do.
I think I lost you for a second. You there?
Good, I'm still here. Yes.
Okay, cool. Is there
Yeah.
a project that you're
Yes.
waiting to do because you're not sure if you're ready to do
Oh,
it yet?
no. No, there isn't. But there are about 275,000 stories that I want to write at the moment, all of which I have listed on my computer. I'm also slightly, and I shouldn't say this, it's terrible, because I have to write a third book and 2 more novellas. I love my series, and I'm totally into writing them. But I also kind of want to start writing another series,
Yeah.
because it's already in the back of my mind, and I already, as much as I can know anything about any of my books, I have an idea of what that series is going to be. And this one is going to be set in 10th century Baghdad.
Mm,
And I've already started doing the reading, the background research for that, to be able to write about that time period and that city convincingly, even though it's going to be a fantasy story. Um, and I kind of, there are days when all I want to do is write that, but that doesn't really make sense. And I know there are some writers out there who jump between projects, and they're writing this, and this is the one they're going to publish, but then they want to write a bit of this because that's what they're waking up thinking about. I can't do that. My brain is too
yeah.
limited. If I start doing that, then I lose track of what I'm supposed to be focusing on, and that's not a good idea. So there are things out there that I want to write. And if you were alluding to the 800 pager, no, I don't have an idea for an 800 pager yet,
Yeah.
but I'm sure it might come to me. I'm also not certain if I'm going to stay in fantasy or even urban fantasy, as much as I enjoy it.
Right.
I quite like the idea of writing sci-fi, and maybe even writing hard sci-fi at some point in time. I don't have the chops for that yet, so we're not even going to go anywhere close to that, because it would look like the dog's dinner if I did attempt something this early on. But I think maybe at a later date, further down the road, that might be the direction. Something space opera-ish,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I loved reading those as a kid, and I still love reading them.
That's that's what really inspired me was the space opera stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the project that's like it's been in my head forever, but I know I'm
Yes.
not ready to tackle that yet.
Yes.
Um, the one that would be a massive tome, I had an idea that would be like a response to Stephen King's It,
Oh.
and it hit my brain a year ago,
Okay.
and it has not left me alone.
Okay.
Um, but I know I'm not quite ready to tackle that one yet. Maybe in 3 or 4 years, I'll
Okay.
be able to do that one. But every once in a while, you get that idea that just it's like a fire in your mind. You're
Yes.
like, oh, this
Yes.
is special,
Yes.
but I don't want to get my dirty fingers on it yet.
Right. Yes. No. And this is kind of my first novel as well. I feel that that is special, but again, in classic W.E. Singh style, that started out as one novel, and then abruptly, really abruptly, chapter 4, my main character decided that hell no, this is not going to be the story. This is going to be the story. And it went in a radically different direction. And I ended up writing the rest of the story that way. So it begins in 13th century Andalusia. It's an Arab town. It's on the verge of being reconquered by the Spanish. The inhabitants of the town don't want to leave. Oh, I've lost you again for a
Oh,
moment.
you're
Are you
back.
back again? Okay. So the inhabitants, you did what my inhabitants did. They don't want to leave, and they're offered this magical solution. And the magical solution turns out to be a little bit more than they'd bargained for. So we go from 13th century Andalusia to a city lost between dimensions that is super sci-fi, but also very ancient at the same time. And I wrote it, and I actually kind of loved the story, but I also then realized at the end of this that I am not at a stage where I can do that kind of story justice
Right.
without spiraling completely. And I also realized that I tried, because it was my first novel, I had basically packed every single idea I've ever had about stories into that story. And it would, definitely benefit from me relieving it of at least 60% of what I've stuffed into it at the moment and concentrating on the rest, and maybe spreading the remainder through a couple of other books rather than trying to cram it all into one book and produce something big and shiny and say, look at this. But that's 400. Actually, it's 450. So that's
Okay.
450 pages. So I was heading in that direction.
Nice.
So
Yeah.
one day we'll get there. One day I'll
One day
write my
will.
door stopper.
One day the door stopper will exist.
It will, even if all it does is stop my door.
Do you have time for a little game?
I always have time for games.
Okay. So this is a little game I call Let Them Fight.
Uh-oh.
So we're gonna have some fictional characters. They're gonna be
Okay.
fighting each other, and you're
Okay.
gonna tell me who do you think is gonna win in the matchup.
What if I don't know who the fictional characters are?
I've
Does that not
tried
matter?
to pick people that were obvious that you probably knew about. So
Okay.
if not, this will be interesting.
Okay.
Okay. So our first pair up is Bruce
Oh,
Lee versus the Bride.
Bruce Lee, hands down.
Bruce Lee, even with
Yeah.
with with her sword
Yeah.
and stuff and all those
That
people she
man.
killed.
Yeah, no, steel wouldn't stop him. There is no way Bruce would be stopped by steel.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah. No, Uma would be toast.
Poor Uma.
Poor
Oh
Uma.
man. Okay. Well, that was fast. Well, this
Sorry.
is a harder one. This
It
is
is
a
a harder
harder
one
one.
because I kind of know who Pee Wee is. I don't know who Steve is.
Steve from Blue's
Um,
Clues. He would
okay,
write this little notebook with the crayon and
okay, that may be a United States of America thing. Um, it also may be that I'm 57 and this may have happened after my time. Um, let's see. Are we going to go for the guy with the furry and no? Look, Pee Wee. Come on, Pee Wee. Pee Wee has this. He has this really dark side.
yeah.
Underneath that humor, there's an edge. I'm not certain Steve has that edge. He might.
No,
He
Steve
might.
doesn't have that edge. You're right.
He
Yeah,
doesn't.
Pee
Then
Wee
I'm
has
going to say
that.
Pee Wee.
I feel like Pee Wee he has that childlikeness about him, but he also
Yeah.
has like he's thought about killing someone. It's like I wonder how I would get away with that. And
Yes, well, there's a young girl who lives at the end of the corridor of the building that I'm in, who is, I think she's probably 4 or 5, and I hear her talk to her parents, and I think that she's probably channeling that side of Pee Wee. She is an absolute terror. I have no idea how they manage to not be quaking in their boots when they're around her. She's very determined. So yes, Pee Wee, Pee Wee, Pee Wee,
Pee Wee,
and
Pee
the
Wee's the winner
4-year-old girl
here.
at the end of the corridor. Yes.
Okay. Literal
Oh.
Satan versus the nail from Home Alone.
Well, that Satan isn't going to win anything, is he? I mean, let's face it.
No, he's just
But
sitting there
then,
crying.
if we're going to say that's slightly tougher, isn't it? Because it's two very different ways of looking this. Because the nail from Home Alone was very effective.
Mm-hmm.
But I would also say that the nail from Home Alone basically only did one job. Now, it did that job very well.
It succeeded in its
It
job.
succeeded in its job, and that is certainly a reason to respect the nail.
Hmm.
But I have a feeling that Satan could probably manage a multiplicity of scenarios and possibly come out winning at the end as well.
Hmm.
And I mean, the nail from Home Alone is not the great tempter. Let's face it.
That is true.
He's
That is
not the
true.
great seducer. It's not the great tempter. It's not. I'm sorry. I'm going to go for Satan.
Ah, sorry, Home Alone nail.
I am
I
sorry for the
thought
Home
maybe
Alone
you
nail.
pull through.
Well, it had a fighting chance, but if we're saying Satan and the nail from Home Alone versus people in your house that you don't want to be in your house, then I
Right.
would say in that one specific circumstance, I would maybe be inclined to go with the nail from Home Alone. But just generally, I don't see the nail as being versatile enough to really perform in different situations and scenarios.
Okay. Okay. Well, here is our last little
Okay.
grouping, and it's special because it's a team up.
Oh, Rincewind. Who doesn't love Rincewind? Oh, but you've got the Doctor. That isn't fair. Yeah, that's not fair. Now, if you had Rincewind and you had the Doctor, then that's a hands down win.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't even know. I don't even know. I don't even know. Oh, okay. I'm gonna go. Yeah, I'm gonna go for. Yeah, this is hard. This isn't. This is not fair. And it's also Tom Baker. It's Tom Baker,
Yes,
Doctor Who.
I chose the good one.
That's very specific. Oh, I'm going to go for the Doctor and Yoda, even though I don't really believe in Yoda, and the Doctor's going to do all of the heavy lifting. But anyway, the Doctor can do
I
the heavy
bet
lifting.
Yoda and the Doctor would get along.
I don't think the
He
Doctor
he
would
he would
care.
be like motivational support for the Doctor.
Perhaps. I think the Doctor would, probably just ignore him and do his own thing.
I bet in the
And
situation the Doctor is trying to help Yoda get home or something.
oh, if it's help you get home, then yes, definitely, I would say the Doctor and the Green Fella, or rather Yoda. I think you're going to get lots of angry messages about the Green Fella as well. So yes, okay, let's go for the Doctor and the Green Fella. Yes, although I do like Rincewind. I do feel a bit sorry for Rincewind. Gandalf, yeah,
He did
Gandalf,
die.
sure, but he did die, exactly. And he didn't see that he was being betrayed by his best friend, which I don't think the Doctor would ever fall into that trap.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes,
That's true.
Doctor and Green
Man,
Fella.
that Tolkien guy, he was kind of a hack, wasn't he? When it came to his character development there.
Yes, that's not something I'm going to agree to. Sorry.
Okay.
At least
Cool.
not publicly on a live stream.
I understand that. Okay, so Tom Baker, of course, is the winner,
Is
single-handedly.
the winner. Yes, absolutely. Single-handedly. Yeah, Yoda doesn't need to do anything.
No.
No,
He's
Tom's got
he's
it
just there to
all under
distract.
control. Yeah, he's just, he's there to amuse people in the background and say cryptic things that Tom is going to ignore anyway. Let's face it. Tom knows what he wants.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Tom ultimately gets what he wants. Whereas Gandalf, Gandalf, who knows what Gandalf wants? I don't think Gandalf knows what Gandalf wants. And Rincewind certainly doesn't know what he wants. So, yes.
That's true. That's
So
true.
if we're going for determination, the determined duo on the side. I have to say that was a lot more fun than the last character battle off I did. I enjoyed it enormously, but I was part of something called, God, what was it called? I'm going to say it wrong now. March Madness on TikTok. Have you heard of that?
Oh, I have heard of that. Yes.
Okay. So I participated this year with my grandmother, who is, of course, my beloved character, who now has her own spin-off series. And kudos to the winner of that match, because he's now gone on to become a semi-finalist. But I got knocked out in the very first episode, the very first round. That was very sad. So I feel better about these kinds of matches now. That left me with a little bit of a sore spot, I have to say.
We had something like that on Twitter a couple weeks ago,
Oh,
where
yes?
someone took a bunch of indie books from a bunch of indie
Yes.
authors and
Yes.
said, "Grok, kill one." And I think I made it one round before Grok
Okay.
says, eh. And I don't know how Grok was deciding.
Well,
So
yes, exactly.
it was fun,
Well,
though.
March Madness is more about how many of your devoted fans you can get to write in and send supportive messages. And being based in Bangkok with devoted friends in mostly the United Kingdom, and the show taking place in the United States. I was Nana Stridsox was caught between time zones. That's what I'm going to say.
Yes,
He was
yes.
caught between time zones, and she was at a disadvantage. But I mean, full strength to the character she was up against, because he's now through to the semifinals I saw today.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's a fun episode actually. Not episode. It's a fun competition. I mean, it really is. It's a popularity contest, but you get to do the most outrageous things, and you get to post crazy videos, and you get to slag off your opponents and tell your followers what your character would do to the other character and how. And it's really super fun. So I was very happy to be part of that.
Very cool.
Even yes.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Are there any last final things you'd like to tell people watching?
Well, apart from buy my book.
Yeah.
Buy my book. Buy the second book. Buy the audiobook. Oh, the audiobook is coming out. I've got an audiobook coming out. Yes, I'm very excited.
Are you doing it yourself, or do you have a group making it?
No, and I don't have a group either. So I have a very talented young man by the name of Ruben, and I can't remember his surname, and that's terrible. I'm going to say Richardson, but it's not. But his first name is Ruben, and he very graciously agreed to do it. So he has done all of the voices. And that's kind of an interesting process. I don't know if you've been through that. When you hear someone else voice your characters.
Yeah, I bet that's weird.
You see them in a because I have very definite voices in my head. I mean, I have voices in my head anyway. That's why I write the kind of books that I write. But I have very definite voices in my head. And his voices, I would say it was a 60-40. So 60% of them were either, yes, that's kind of what I think they would sound like, or it's close enough. And 40 was so radically different that when I first heard the initial 15-minute demo, I was kind of shocked.
Yeah.
And I had to sit there and listen to it and think, because my initial reaction was, no, but she doesn't sound like that. No, and I kind of dissolved into a puddle on the floor. And then I picked myself up and realized that I was being silly, and this is someone else's interpretation. And of course, they're not going to hear the same voices that I hear. And then I sat and I listened to it, and I thought, is this true to the character? And yes, they were true to the character. They just weren't the way I imagined hearing them. And we tweaked them a bit, and I gave him a few notes, and then he made some changes. But
Yeah.
that's a weird experience. Really fun, and I'm looking forward to seeing how people react to it. But it's a weird experience. I imagine, one day when, of course, it gets made into a film, and I don't know who is starring as whatever, it's probably the same experience for the writer, isn't it then?
Mm-hmm.
That they see, I don't know, Ryan Gosling playing their character and think, I did not have Ryan Gosling in mind when I was writing this character. But, he does a very good job of it.
Yeah.
But it must be semi-disorienting.
I did see Andy Weir talking about someone asking that exact question.
Yes.
Like, how does it feel? Do they get it like it wasn't your imagination, or like is it weird seeing it different? And he was like, I see everything as blobs when I'm writing. I'm not sure what they look like. So he said when he saw Rocky, he was like, oh, that's what he looks like. Amazing.
Yes, I think I heard another quote of his where he was basically saying that and I haven't seen the film yet, so I don't know, and I haven't read the book yet either. But he said something I thought was very gracious, and he said that he felt that Mr. Gosling had brought to the character a depth that he hadn't necessarily written into the character. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a really generous thing to say as a writer, because you are talking about your own creation. Yeah. And then to give someone else credit and say that they, in fact, have added, in your eyes, to your own creation is quite something.
Yeah.
So I look forward to being able to do that myself one day, and congratulate Ryan for bringing added depth to Xander Chung that I hadn't imagined. But that's maybe a few months down the road. I'm not going to get ahead of myself yet. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you for coming on the show. Where can people find you? You're on Instagram, right? You're anywhere else?
I am on Instagram as W.E. Singh. I am sometimes on TikTok as at W.E. Singh Author. I think I've changed that name so many times. But my TikTok is semi-jinxed because I'm in Thailand and it's a Thai number. And so I'm talking in English about English language books, and it gets sent out to a local Thai audience who, bless them, are not interested, because why would they be? But that's the magic of TikTok. I'm also on Facebook, so I'm on
Okay.
Facebook as, oh god, I should know all of these things, shouldn't I? But if you look up W.E. Singh on Facebook, you'll find me. I think it's W.E. Singh author or W.E. Singh books. It's one of the other. W.E. Singh author or W.E. Singh books. I seem to play with. Yes, but my social
Excellent.
media game needs to be upped. So if you have any
Excellent.
tips, let me know.
I don't have very many tips. I have suggestions maybe that are possibly bad, but
Excellent. Well, maybe once we've stopped recording.
yes, yes. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a
Thank you,
pleasure.
Isaac.
Everyone watching, thank you for joining us. And in the
Yes.
future, if you're watching, thank you for
Yes.
joining. Leave a comment, leave a like, ask
Yes.
questions, whatever you
Lots of
want,
life.
all that jazz, all that
Okay.
YouTube stuff.
Mm.
Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.